the other. Now someone may say, but wait a minute, we came to this class, we spent our time, our effort, perhaps money, I don't know, but anyways, gas, whatever. So we want all 10 strategies. How many people want the full 10 strategy experience? Okay, so I'm going to let you in on a secret. Unless you already know it, then it's not really a secret. And here it is. If you go to the Sapiens Institute website, we have a learning platform. And you'll realize why I'm saying this at the end of the day. That learning platform, this whole class is on that platform. Okay? So therefore, whatever I miss, it's on that platform. That's a free learning platform. And there is a caveat, however, that you have to actually register and take the class. So as opposed to this class, that particular class, in order to go from one lecture to the next, you actually have to go through quizzes. Okay? You have to internalize the material and so on and so forth. No, we did not throw this up on YouTube just for people to watch. For that reason, we want you to be serious about it. So while I may not be able to get through all 10 strategies, they're still available for you. And there's other classes on there that I think you will find a lot of benefit from. Okay? So for example, we just released a few months ago a class on the entire LGBTQ ideology. It's by Dr. Carl Sharif. Anyone knows who that is? Okay, amazing academic, scholar. I can't say enough good things about him. That being said, you know the section on worldviews we covered? That course also covers it, so you can skip that because that course is 30 hours long. Okay? But I'm telling you, he gets into details that will equip you in a way you cannot imagine, right? Certain doubts that people from this ideology will come with, and they'll say things like, you know what, there was a scholar who was also a homosexual. And they have evidence for that, right? So he deals with that and undoes that entire narrative. Like, okay, so what do they mean? Who is this person? Why are they saying that? And what are the, what they call philosophical presuppositions that they're bringing to the table? So that's a phenomenal course. We have a course specifically on da'wah to non-Muslims called Awakening the Truth Within, right? So we were talking about the fitrah, the heart. That course is on there. We have a course on liberalism, a course on secularism. We have a ton of courses on Christianity. So we have everything from how do you deal with sin and salvation, Christology, in other words, the concept of, what they call the Trinity, how do you understand the nature of Jesus, not from a biblical perspective, from a philosophical perspective, right? So it gets into some of the history, how that evolved, the very concept, but again, it's not going to go really deep into the Bible. And other courses, like some of them are just not off the top of my head, I can't really remember, but a lot of good courses. Oh, the divine reality, the course on atheism. So what our goal with these courses is to basically empower and equip all of you and Muslims across the world to be able to deal with issues as they arise, issues within modernity, right? In fact, we have another course on dehumanization related to Gaza, which we just released as well. Our publications are in the same vein. So when we have courses, we also have books. So if you're not a person that likes to go through courses, you can download our books related to the courses for free. So we write the book, we bring the course together, we test the course. Some of you are guinea pigs today. And then we go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what was good, what was bad, and so on and so forth, right? All of that, the entire idea is to empower all of you, right? That being said, I'm going to do one shameless plug, and that is, if you can, support the organization. Even if that's a small $10, $20, $30 donation a month, this is what keeps us going and allows us to keep our content free. And we want to keep doing that so that anyone, anywhere in the world can access it, no matter where they're from, right? They don't need to have, a big paycheck to say, take our course or whatever it might be, okay? So that'll be my only plug for tonight. You can go to this website and set that up if you like. Anyway, so coming back to it, free courses, free material. By the way, the latest book we have, one more thing, related to Gaza are specific talking points when, what is going on? Hold on a second. I do not want to print anything. Okay, specific talking points when your interlocutors are going to throw certain things at you. right? So the quintessential one is what? Do you condemn Hamas, right? But there's others, because they're trying to bring kind of like, okay, like, does Israel have a right to defend itself? And all of these talking points, it will empower you to dismantle those talking points. So that's the latest book by Hamza. I don't know where, if you go to the site, it's right there on the front, right? You can download that for free, read it, arm yourself. It's got a lot of facts, figures, and so on and so forth. It's a really nice way to engage with others, and that way you kind of know your stuff without being inundated with information. Because a lot of times what happens is like, oh man, I've got to study all the way back to 1947, and then the Nakba first one, and so sometimes people get so overwhelmed, forget it, right? So no one wants this. So what it does is it distills that information to give you the core tools that you need to say, here are talking points that you can use, right? So that's just the latest publication. The title of the book is just, it's not coming to me, but if you go to the site, you'll be able to find it there. It's written by Hamza, and there's a co-author there as well. Okay, now, back to our regular programming. I need to start the slideshow here. There we go. Okay, so with these strategies, like I said, I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. So we'll start with the first one, which we call be aware. Now, so again, we're speaking about doubts. We're speaking about when these doubts arise, what are you supposed to do? The first step, which may seem almost intuitive, is to understand that shubuhat exist. Like I said, it's almost intuitive, like they're out there. Okay? So, this happens before shubuhat come into your heart. Okay, so this is not afterwards. This is like, okay, you have an awareness. So, knowing that something presents a danger and that it exists allows you to not be a victim of evil. Point, shubuhat exist. Okay? If you know they exist, you know that they're of an evil nature. You have to watch out for them. You have to be aware of them. So, it's mentioned here the Sahaba were worried about nifaq. In fact, I think it was, now I'm forgetting, I think it was Qadi Iyad, if I'm not mistaken, who said that the only one who is not worried about nifaq is the munafiq. And the quality of a believer is that he's worried about nifaq, right? Something like that. I don't remember the exact phrase that he used. But so the Sahaba were worried about nifaq, right? Like I mentioned earlier in the hadith of Hanzala. Ibrahim alayhi salam used to supplicate to Allah not to worship idols. The Prophet ﷺ would supplicate to Allah, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik, right? O turner of hearts, keep my heart firm upon your deen. This is the best of creation who's making this dua, right? So we all have to understand that shubuhat exist, they're dangerous, they're out there, and we have to start now doing things to prepare ourselves. The first step is recognizing that they exist. Because a lot of times people will go online and say, oh, ex-Muslim video, let me click on that, right? It's like, hold on a second, man. Understand that there's a danger in that, because that could affect you. And I'm not saying we can't deal with the arguments of ex-Muslims or something like that. What I'm saying is, from your own personal perspective, understand that I may not be equipped to deal with whatever stuff this person is bringing. That's a reality, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So do not take shubuhat lightly. All right? It's like jumping into an ocean of conflicting worldviews. Like you see sharks swimming, you're not going to be like, well, I can do this, and jump right in, right? The idea is like, okay, you understand that's dangerous. Maybe someone who's equipped to deal with sharks should be jumping in and taking care of the shark problem, not me. It doesn't have to be me, all right? Okay, point number 2. So the first one was be aware. The second thing is, don't pay any attention to it. Now again, this might seem overly simplistic. Like, what do you mean? Shouldn't I handle this? Shouldn't I go and go right for it? No, you don't have to. Okay? So again, this is before the shubha enters. Do not engage with media or platforms that give rise to shubuhat. You don't have to click on those videos, man. You don't. It's not going to benefit you, especially if you're not equipped with the background information. Because I'm telling you, there's certain shubuhat that if you don't, let's say, have a metaphysical backdrop, you don't understand worldviews, and you jump into it, you will be affected by it. That's the reality. Remember, a shubha is that which resembles the truth. And so if it resembles the truth, you could very well say, okay, yes, this is true. Okay, so again, just because I'm saying stop, avoid, and ignore, right? You don't have to engage with it. It does not mean that they are valid or have intellectual basis. Shubuhat in and of themselves do not have a valid or intellectual basis. But that's not why I'm saying to just ignore it. Why I'm saying that is for your own protection. They don't have anything. They don't have teeth, basically. But they're still dangerous. All right? So, shubuhat are not strong. The only problem is that we have weak hearts. So again, it's not only about you having enough knowledge, but you may not be spiritually ready to be able to deal with certain shubuhat. Right? Yeah.
Can you give a couple more examples of things that you would stay away from?
So one of the obvious ones is a lot of these videos up by ex-Muslims. Okay? Say, like, oh, I was Muslim and then I saw the truth or something. Right? Those are pretty clear. Like, all right. Then you have other videos that come that are a little more, a little harder to identify. Okay, so you have some sort of academic who comes and says like, oh, let us now take a look at the manuscripts of the Quran and why, and that might be the video, manuscripts of the Quran. You're like, okay, this is religious, let me click on it. And he clicks on it and that whole video is full of so many presuppositions. Okay, this is a very popular academic. And his whole thing was like, well, we found manuscripts of X, Y, and Z, and this shows that the Quran was not consistent. It changed. Now, if you're not equipped with concepts of like how do we understand testimonial knowledge, does written script, what is its epistemic value compared to orality? If you don't have understandings, you don't understand that might be very persuasive. Oh, well, there's how am I supposed to deal with this, right? So just being a bit judicious. If there's some sort of doubt that you're doubting, okay, this video might not be great, turn it off, right? And spend time doing something else. Yeah.
Does this also include the realm of religious debates?
So I would say, look, I think there's been a kind of like the reason why there's so many videos on religious debates is because they're fun to watch, right? What is the educational value of a debate? That is something that I would question, right? So debates are good, and this is even something we kind of internally discuss in Sapiens, kind of behind the scenes, is that what is the actual benefit of a debate? Do you actually go through and you're teaching people something in a debate? Maybe a little bit, something they may not have known. The real kind of force behind a debate is really to, give people a high iman. Basically, that's what it is. You're going there, you're cheering for your team, that team is, hijab or whoever it might be, the Muslim, and you go in, he goes out like, you're done, you're finished, and you're like, yes! Khalas, that's it. You're not going to go in there like, have something that's going to really kind of affect you at your core, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But don't make that something that you're just watching as just debate upon debate upon debate upon debate. Once in a while, like entertainment, sure, right? But also have a program by which you are connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you're doing that, then debates are not really a problem, right? Generally. But I wouldn't consume too many debates. And I'm coming from Sapiens, and we do debates all the time, right? So trust me, from someone on the inside, and this is something that I'd spoken to some of the brothers about when when you go online, the one place that people think that da'wah happens is where? You guys know? It's in London. Speaker's Corner, right? Everyone says, oh, Speaker's Corner, this and that. It's like, da'wah, as if da'wah is defined by what happens in Speaker's Corner. I've been to Speaker's Corner. I was underwhelmed. Right? It is not, in the videos, it seems like it's like this massive place that has all of these amazing discussions. It's not. It's actually pretty small. And generally the discussions are just, Like the guy that came up to me and he's like, I believe in animal rights. You should be a vegan. I'm like, okay. Right? I was like, I will be vegan. And then then I went, a few hours later and I had a steak. And then I'll be vegan again. Right? It's like my daughter came to me, she's like, Baba, I want to be a vegetarian. And 10 minutes later, she's having chicken nuggets. I'm like, what happened? She's like, yeah, I'm going to be after this. Right? So, anyway, so coming back to the point about debates, consume them like you would consume any other entertainment, frankly, But have a program by which you're studying something, right? Okay. So shubahat are like parasites that suck your iman. The prophetic advice is to run away from them, right? If you know something's going to affect your iman, is that for me? Jazakallah khair. If you know something's going to affect your iman, go away. When the Prophet ﷺ was talking about whoever hears about Al-Masih Dajjal, like, are you supposed to go and say, oh, Dajjal is here, let's go check him out? No, the Prophet ﷺ said the exact opposite. Whoever hears about the news of the false Messiah, Al-Masih Dajjal, let him flee from him. By God, by Allah, a man will go to him considering himself a believer, but will instead follow him because of the doubts he will present. So even the prophetic advice was not go right into the fitna, it's to go away from the fitna. Right? Like I had a friend of mine when I was growing up, but it was a while ago, and he told me, he goes, man, if the Dajjal comes, I want to go right up to him. I was like, really? Like after that, why would you, why would you want to do that? He goes, no, you don't understand. You know that one boy who goes in front of Al-Masih Dajjal and he chops him in half, brings him back to life, and then he says, I know for a fact you are Dajjal. He goes, I want to be that boy, right? So I was like, okay, fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't risk it, but okay, I get it, But anyways, and some of the ulama mentioned, like, how does that boy know? And he knows because of these hadith that are actually transmitted, which is interesting. It goes back to, the transmission of hadith related to eschatology, okay? End times hadiths. Anyway, moving on. So the idea is, that if you see that there's a source of doubts and things like that, run away, move away from it, ignore it. Okay? Ibn al-Qayyim has a beautiful statement here. He says, whoever falls prey to the claws of their doubts will have his faith shredded into pieces. Whoever allows his heart to open to their vile tribulations will find himself a burning furnace. And whoever lends an ear to their deceptions will find them coming between him and firm belief. Indeed, the corruption they cause on earth is a great, but most people are unaware. Again, this doesn't mean we cannot handle those shubuhat. It doesn't mean that they have validity. But understand where you are and who you are. Okay? Like, okay, you have a certain sense, you have a certain knowledge base, you've engaged with these things. Okay, fair enough. You've studied with people. But if you haven't, don't risk it. It's not worth it. Because what's the cost? Your iman. And what does that mean? If you die upon kufr, what does that mean? May Allah protect all of us, right? So it's not worth it, man. Okay. Stop, seek refuge, right? And this is interesting. Like, a lot of people know this hadith. So, the Prophet ﷺ says, shaitan will come to one of you and say, who created this? And who created that? Until he says to him, who created your Lord? When it comes to this, let him seek refuge in God and stop such thoughts. In another narration, let him say, Amantu billah, I have faith in Allah. Here's the thing. Now, we at Sapiens, we teach many arguments for the existence of Allah, like the proof for the existence of Allah, or whatever you want to call it, okay? But the thing is, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, oh, when shaitan comes to you and says, who created this and who created that, then you will engage with him on the argument from dependency. Or the kalam cosmological argument. Like, that's not what was said. The Prophet ﷺ is specifically saying, stop, seek refuge with Allah, and say, Amantu billah. Why? Because, the Prophet ﷺ is clearly here stating that sometimes these are not intellectual doubts. They're coming from shaitan, who's just there to prod you on. And if that's the case, just stop and step away, right? Seek refuge with Allah. You don't always have to know the argument for the proof of whatever it might be. You can step away. That's okay. All right? All right, moving on. I'm going to skip that. Number 3. So number 1 was? Be aware. Number 2? Stay away, right? Number 3, make the distinction. I think this is an important one. Understand that there's a difference between a shubha, a waswasa, and a question. Okay? So, if you saw these berries, which one would you eat if you were hungry enough? The one on the left one? See, everyone says that. The right one. This one? All right, how many people would eat the red one here? Raise your hands. Okay, how many people would anyone eat the middle one? No, one person eat the middle. How about the one way at the end? Okay, it's a pretty even split, okay? So, here's how it works. The one at the end with healthy grapes, if you ate these, you'd be dead. And if you ate those, you'd be dead, okay? What am I trying to say here? Understand, make the distinction. If you don't know the distinction, it could kill you, right? You could have bad consequences. So what we're saying here is that there are things that are known as waswasas, right? Wiswas. So you should know what those are. So I put the English definition, but we will go over that. So whisperings are thoughts that you do not agree with, do not believe, and have a psychological aversion towards. Okay? And in fact, they're a sign of Iman. And you might be like, what? What do you mean? How does that work? The thing is, and this actually goes back to a fitra concept, which I'll mention after I mention this hadith. So it is narrated, Abu Hurairah said, some of the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said to him, we find in ourselves thoughts that are too terrible to speak of. The Prophet ﷺ said, are you really suffering from that? They said, yes. He said, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. He said, that is like a clear sign of faith. The thing, yeah.
This was mentioned in Roma yesterday.
Oh, it was. You mentioned it. Allahu Akbar. That's great. Great minds think alike. Alhamdulillah. So, the point being is that we all have certain thoughts. It happens to everyone. And if you ever want to see someone actually speak about them, go watch, don't do this, but you'll see comedians talk about this, right? Because they take those terrible thoughts and they make it into a joke, right? Like, hey man, you ever been in the middle of you're driving your car and then you see all these pedestrians on the right side and you said, you know what, if I just turned my steering just 45 degrees, they would all die, right? I mean, you would never do that, right? But the thought is pretty bad. You're thinking of murder, right? It's essentially what you're thinking about. So, everyone has those thoughts. They come to everyone. Now, here's the thing. If you recognize them, you say, wait a minute, this is a bad thought. It means you've got a strong, healthy iman, strong, healthy fitrah. Because you've recognized it as bad in the first place. Right? And so just having those thoughts is not negative. In fact, if you don't speak about them, you don't act upon them, you recognize them as being bad, that's a sign of iman. A sign of good iman, right? Of strong iman. Sorry?
That's where the psychological aversion comes from.
Right, exactly. That's where the psychological aversion comes from. So it's narrated from Abu Hurairah, who's tried to back to the Prophet ﷺ, who said, truly Allah has overlooked for my ummah that which is whispered and I should say that, and that which is thought about in the lowest self, as long as they do not act upon it or speak about it. Hatta, thoughts that you can have, let's say, you know what, I'm thinking of SSA, same-sex attraction. Are you held accountable for that? No. Unless what? Unless you act upon it. Right? And this is why, and I think I was mentioning this last night, is that there are people that's a real problem for them. And so they have to actually deal with that as an actual problem. Like they actually feel attraction towards people of the same gender. Yeah.
What would happen if let's say you have this thought passing through your head,
Yeah.
but you deliberately invite it again and think about it again?
So the idea is you should try to do the exact opposite, right? So you seek refuge with Allah, like we mentioned earlier, and you ask Allah to take away that thought, and you struggle against it, right? So keep yourself busy with something else until you're able to overcome it. But that's a good segue because certain people have thoughts of, like I said, SSA. It's very difficult. It's not easy to deal with that. But many people have. I was mentioning a podcast yesterday, phenomenal podcast. It's called A Way Beyond the Rainbow. Okay? I think season 5 is what you want to check out. This is a young man who actually was dealing with SSA and was able to overcome it. Came back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was able to do it because of certain ways in which he approached the issue, which I really do think is worth your time to listen to, especially as, y'all live in California. No. Yeah, I've heard. It was the last time that was my whole topic at the conference here in Sacramento. Sorry, you were saying?
But do you think that this will be a sin upon them?
It's a sin upon them if they persist and they do nothing about it, eventually, right? But just the thought itself does not have a valuation of sin. Remember, sin has to be connected with agency. It has to be connected with you having the ability to do something about it, right? So you have the choice to either do something or not do something. But intention, right, exactly. So if your intention is, like, actually maybe not even intention, but really it's about whether you act upon it, as a very kind of baseline. But it gets a bit nuanced, because if those thoughts keep festering, eventually you could be held accountable for it because you didn't do anything about it in the first place, right? But that's not something that happens until kind of later, right? Initially, a person should struggle against that, Any other questions? Yes?
So when somebody has these thoughts and they're struggling to decipher, I've got a question. Well, how do I know that that's waswas, or how do I know if that's a thought from my own self?
Okay, so what do you mean by a thought from your own self?
So, is that a thought that came into my mind because that's a part of who I am?
Okay, so the question you want to ask yourself, is that something that would undermine my iman? That's really what the question is. And that will be the distinguishing between what is a whisper, what is a valid question, and what is an actual shubha. An actual shubha is that which undermines your iman entirely. But these thoughts, they're not going to undermine your entire iman, right? You having the thought of, let's say, even something really bad, like killing someone. That's not going to undermine your iman, just you having the thought, right? But now, if you start saying, I'm not sure if Allah exists, that's a different case altogether. That's not just, if you're really just, I have no idea, I don't know, I've got to really, that's a shubha, right? That's not just a whisper, right? So how you distinguish what this section's about is that one undermines your iman and the other does not.
Which one undermines the iman?
An actual shubha, right? A whisper doesn't do that, and a valid question doesn't do that, which we'll get into what I mean by valid questions. And in fact, it could be the same question, which I'll get into in just a second, okay? All right, but everyone clear so far about wiswas? Yeah? Okay. Okay, valid questions. So, valid questions are not doubts that undermine your belief or lead you to distort Islam in some way. So again, is this question going to undermine your iman? Okay? This could be the very same question. Does God exist? Now, and again, this depends on the predisposition, the backdrop to the question. If the question is coming from, I'm not sure if Allah exists, then it's a shubha. If it's a question about, does Allah exist? I need to know how to make da'wah, and I want to know what the proofs are. Same question, but one is a valid question, one is an actual doubt. And what is the thing that determines that? The predisposition. Like, where are you coming from? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Does this also go for like atheists or Christians that are questioning their belief and like, maybe this is correct? Does Allah exist?
I mean, at that fundamental level, perhaps, yeah. In the sense that, are they questioning, does Allah exist? But the thing with Christians is that there's a lot of extra baggage, right, which can kind of cause that. So, like clear contradictions, like the Trinity is really hard to deal with, right? Like, how do you digest that? Like, even the Pope is scratching his head, going, "How do we figure this out again?" Right? So, I think the dynamics is a bit different, right? With Islam, it becomes a bit different because we don't really have those sort of, things that kind of undermine the very concept, or let's say theological concepts, which are so difficult that there's no way to figure it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So there's nothing wrong with questions. The Sahaba had questions, right? In fact, when you open the Quran, you find the statement, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ يَسْأَلُونَكَ this. So where are those ayat coming from? Who are the ones asking the questions? The Sahaba, right? They ask you concerning this and this and this and this. So even the Sahaba, so there's nothing wrong with asking questions. But what becomes a problem is when those questions are for the specific idea or the specific backdrop that it's undermining your iman. That it's going against what you're saying, like distorting Islam in some way, right? From your own personal perspective. So everyone clear on the difference between valid questions and an actual shubha? Again, it's your own predisposition. Yeah,
So with the same question, it's the same question.
yeah,
So if you're asking the question and saying, what is the hikmah of Allah, for instance,
yeah,
Ta'ala ordaining something,
yeah.
versus why is Allah ordaining something that is maybe in opposition to liberalism or any of the isms that I'm...
Of course. So that's a worldview perspective now.
So one is shubha and one is digging towards the hikmah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's interesting that Shah Waliullah Dehlwi, rahimahullah, when he wrote his Hujjatul al-Baligha, I think in the introduction he mentions that in order to understand the wisdoms that Allah has given, this happens when the Muslims are weak, right? Because then they want to know the wisdoms, right? So even, and I'm not saying that wanting to know the wisdoms is a doubt or a shubha, but you find that phenomena starts to happen more and more according to Shah Wali, and I think even Shatibi mentions the same thing, because he was writing about maqasid al-sharia and things like that. I think he mentioned something similar as well, that usually this starts to happen when Muslims are confronted with, like what's the thought. Like it's not just about sami'na wa ta'na, like we just hear and we obey. Well, wait, I need to know why. Like my environment around me is saying that I should do this and shouldn't do this, but my deen is saying something else. Once you have that conflict, that's where you start saying, okay, well, what's the hikmah behind this? Again, there's nothing wrong with asking, why would Allah want this, why wouldn't this? That's a valid question. It's just an interesting phenomenon. So, okay. So, we ask valid questions. We're not going to know everything. We have epistemic limitations. If we are sincere, believe in Islam, do not doubt the fundamentals, then those questions are not doubts. Okay? However, then you have doubts / shubuhat. So falsehood that undermines the fundamentals of Islam or distorts the religion in some way. Okay? What happens is that there are questions where you're starting from the position of not being sure about the truth of Islam. Okay? That's where you now say, okay, this is a shubha. Why I'm making this, why I'm mentioning this, is that it's important for you to make the distinction. I can't tell you how many times we'll get a call on Lighthouse, or not a call, but a session on Lighthouse, and the person is not really going through a shubha, they're going through a waswasa. And that's it, but they haven't recognized it. They're thinking, oh my God, this is it, it's over, I've left Islam, blah, blah, blah. Relax, man. Before you start freaking out and stuff like that, this happens to all of us, And there's certain things, there's ways you navigate out of it. Okay? Like, sometimes people, when it comes to, like, let's say wudu or something, they get waswasas all the time. Like, oh, did I make it correctly? Oh, let me do it again. Let me do it again. Let me do it again. I don't know, maybe some of you have gone through this, or whatever, right? When you're in salah, was this second rak'ah? I don't know. It's like, it happens to people in different ways and, different paradigms. But the important thing is if you're able to recognize this is a waswasa, this is a valid question, this indeed is a shubha, now you're empowered to deal with, okay, let's now understand what is what. I don't need to really worry about these particular things, right? If I'm going in my wudu over and over and over again, keep in mind there's a qa'idah that would be that al-yaqeen la yuzulu bi shak, right? Certainty is not removed by doubt. So if you prayed asr and it's kind of time for maghrib, you're like, oh, did I make wudu? Didn't I make wudu? If you made wudu, according to most of the madhahib, I don't want to get into fiqh discussion. Shaykh Yasser would come to me and be like, wait a minute, but amongst the ahnaf, so I don't want to get into it. Point being, there are ways to deal with those whisperings that you can go through, right? Okay. Any questions about this section? Think we're good? Number 4, your environment. This is the one that I love because this is the one piece of advice I give to parents. Okay? You have to know your children's environment. This is not like we'll get into some studies from social psychology and stuff like that, but just right off the bat, if you have children, this is not a complicated concept at all. If you have little, Jimmy and little Bobby, right? And you're trying to figure out, okay, Muhammad, should he hang out with Jimmy or Bobby? Jimmy is a really nice kid. He comes over, hello, Mr. Tasleem, how are you? Very kind, very nice, very intelligent, likes to study, loves reading books, on his way to Harvard. Then you've got little Bobby over here. He's like, "What's up, Mr. T? What's going on?" And he comes in and he's like, "You know what? Let's go out and do all that." You're just like, I don't know about this guy, right? Who would I want my kid to hang out with? Jimmy or Bobby, right? It's probably going to be Jimmy. And I'm just talking like materialistically here now, right? So we understand our environment, intuitively, in a sense, right? Essentially, that's what we're talking about when it comes to shubuhat. Now, there are studies that are known as studies in social psychology related to social conformity. Okay? Now again, you don't have to get to studies to understand these concepts, but there's two types. I'll let you take the course and deal with these because I don't want to get too deep into these. Informational conformity and normative conformity. This is an interesting, what they call line experiment. This is one of the first ones that was done on social conformity. Okay? By the way, when I say social conformity, do you guys know what I mean? Like the people that are surrounding you, they will influence you in a certain way. You feel like you have to conform to certain things that they're doing. So this was one of the earliest studies by Solomon Asch, 1951. So what they would do is they would bring in their experiment, they would bring in a person like this innocent participant, and they would ask him, so which one of these lines is the closest to I, A, B, or C? So most people say, okay, it's probably B. Okay? But what happens is that then they would bring in three what they call stooges, who would be kind of in on the joke or whatever. It's not a joke, but part of the experiment. All of them would answer, let's say, A. What they found is I think it was 86% of the time, when they would all answer A, even though the person believes it's B, he would say A. And you don't need social social conformity studies to recognize this, right? When you go out to, let's say, lunch with your coworkers, right? You guys have Cheesecake Factory here? Yeah? Anyone like Cheesecake Factory? No? You don't like cheesecake, or you don't like Cheesecake Factory? Okay, fair enough. So I'm gonna go with Cheesecake Factory because it's decent, all right? So let's say you're going out to lunch with your coworkers. And in the morning they're like, hey man, we're gonna go to Cheesecake Factory. And you love cheesecake, let's say, right? So all day you're thinking about what? Cheesecake, right? For me, I like the banana cream cheesecake. I know it's weird, but whatever. So, all morning you're thinking like, oh, I'm gonna have this cheesecake, it's gonna be epic, I'm gonna have it, it's delicious. You're thinking about it, you're even tasting it maybe, right? Like, oh, this is gonna be, the flavor is just gonna pop in my mouth and blah, 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 blah. The whole day. Come around lunchtime, you're almost jumping out of your seat like, yo, let's go. So you go out to lunch and, you've got, let's say, 25 coworkers, right? So you're sitting on this long table, you order food or whatever it is, the meal finishes, and now the time comes for that question you've been waiting for. Would anyone here like dessert? So they start from the other end of the table. You're at this end, this is the other end. So they start with person number 1. No, I'm good, I'm full. Person number 2, nah, I'm gonna pass. Person number 3, yeah, no, I don't think so. I've got to get back to work. And person number 4, no, I don't think so. Until eventually it comes down to you. Are you really going to be the mujahid that says, I don't care, I will have that cheesecake? Right? Yes, you would have to be in that state of mind to order, because at that point you're going to be like, I guess not. Right? Most likely. But that's what we talk about when we talk about social conformity. Right? That's what we're talking about. Your environment influences you. Like there are certain groups of atheists, which is very interesting, that when we talk about the divine reality, that they're not atheists because of, some sort of intellectual doubt or some sort of this. They're atheists because everyone around them is an atheist. Like this one lady was at some atheist convention and she's like, I'm happy to be atheist, yay! It's like, what? like what are you talking about, right? Purely based on just an environment, right? Your environment has a profound impact on you. Social contagion is part of that. Like the whole transgenderism issue is nothing more than social contagion, right? And specifically related to like young girls, in fact, right? There's a certain book that came out, I'm forgetting the title of it, which is very good. She speaks about it as a social contagion. Irreversible damage or something like that. It's good because she's outlined the entire phenomena of transgenderism, specifically with young girls, that in fact it's more with young girls. It used to be before, let's say 2012, the phenomena existed primarily in boys, and that too, it was 0.01% of the population. In 2012,
Males. It was in middle-aged males.
right, it was, and then all of a sudden it shifted to the age group of 12 to 22, women, girls, right? Why? Not because all of a sudden everyone woke up and says, I don't have to worry about my gender, right? It's because it was a fad, it was a social contagion, right? That was exacerbated by online personalities, it was exacerbated by, obviously policies in school and all sorts of other things. So social conformity is extremely powerful. You've got to look at who your friends are, right? Al-maru ala dini khalili. You are upon the deen, the worldview of your friends, right? I remember when I first started, I guess, practicing or came to Islam, I basically left off all of my old friends. And one day, somebody called and he said, Fahad, I haven't heard from you in a really long time. And we had like a conversation. I was like, yeah, I'm just kind of busy with stuff and this and that. And I was just starting off, right? Had started studying with some Shaykh and stuff like that. So I just didn't want to, I didn't really feel like being friends with them. Let me just be blunt, right? So like midway through the conversation, it's like, Fahad, what's happened to you, man? You haven't said one curse word since the beginning of this conversation, right? And I was like, really? That's more, anyway. So point being, social conformity is very real. Your environment affects even what you believe and what you perceive, right? And that's especially true. I'm gonna say for young people, but even older people, we're not excluded from that, right? Like, you have kids or whatever it is, you are also affected by the people around you. That's why, that's why there's an encouragement to come to the masjid. Correct, Shaykh Yasser? Right? If you think about the hadith of the 7 promised paradise, there's actually a rabt between the categories, right? The just ruler, who's the one that establishes things, that affect the youth, that affect the masjid, and goes all the way. Why? Because the masjid is a place where you meet people who are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a youth that grows up in the worship of Allah is the one that's going to be found in the masjid. And so on and so on. Why? Environment. Right? Your environment has a profound impact on you. Okay, I'm going to kind of skip all of these. Quranic advice, obviously from Surah Al-Kahf. I remember some years ago, Shaykh Safi Khan out in Dar es Salaam in Maryland, and he was talking about Surah Al-Kahf, and he said, it's interesting that Allah mentions the dog in Surah Al-Kahf. He said, Allah did not mention me, He did not mention you, but for some reason, He mentioned this dog. Why? Why was the dog mentioned? It wasn't because of the value of the dog, it was the value of the people surrounding the dog. Right? Ashab al-Kahf. So the people surrounding the dog are what gave the dog value. So the dog is mentioned, you are not mentioned, I'm not mentioned, right? And it will be recited until the day of judgment. Okay. And I mentioned this hadith already, a person is upon the deen of his close friend, so be aware who you befriend. I'm sure you know the hadith, the example of a good companion who sits with you in comparison with the bad one is like that of the musk seller and the blacksmith, bellows. From the first you would either buy musk or enjoy its good smell, while the bellows, you guys know what bellows are? It's an archaic word here. What's another word for it? It's like a smoke, like a blower, right? It's like a place where there's a lot of smoke and soot and stuff like that, right? So it enjoys good smell, but while the bellows, you would either burn your body or your clothes, or you would get a bad, nasty smell, right? It's actually a very interesting hadith when I took my son for Umrah, and this was the first time he had actually gone. And I remember he walked into a perfume seller store, and he said, Baba, now this hadith makes sense to me, right? Because he just walked, he's like, wow, right? So anyway, just reminded me of that. Okay, so, and at the end, the Prophet ﷺ said, you will be with those whom you love. So the consequences of having good friends are the ones that are close to Allah, is that you'll be close to them, and inshallah, they're close to Allah in the akhirah as well. Okay, number 5, how are we doing on time? Because this one's a bit long. Okay, so let's do this. I'd like everyone to stand for a few minutes. I know I've been going for a while. Stretch. Stretch the back. Should we have them do specific stretches together? I always find those really dorky when they try to do them together, but anyways. All right, have a seat, guys, inshallah. So, one of the best ways to deal with doubts is strategy number 5. And that is study Islam. The more you know, the more you arm yourself, the more you can deal with shubuhat. It's very simple. And by the way, so you notice these 10 strategies, they're not rocket science. I'm not coming with some sort of deep philosophical point, and like that's why I said that was all for the morning. We did that on purpose because people are a little more fresh. Right now it's just we're on cruise control, right, by the end of the day. So they're not complicated, but it's just so that they're hopefully, like, in a sense, a refresher for you, right? Like me telling you, okay, study Islam, that'll help you. It shouldn't be like, whoa, my mind is blown, right? Like that's not the point. But to kind of stress it, like you understand, okay? Okay, so I need to skip all of this because we already went through all of this. All right. But we have to understand, when I say studying Islam, it's different than if I was just say studying. Because you study a lot of different things. You study organic chemistry, you study accounting, you study psychology, you study all sorts of things. What's the difference between studying Islam and studying other subjects? What do you think? Well, is there a real kind of substantial difference?
You're studying, in one case you're studying for the sake of your soul in the next life.
Okay.
And in the other you're studying to better yourself here.
Okay, all right. That's one way of looking at it. Actually, wait, before I get you, I'm going to... Way back there. Yep, you.
I think, like, if you look at them from a perspective, each one has different goals. For example, if you study chemistry, it's like for worldly benefits, and then if you study Islam, it's benefit for hereafter and then kind of.
Okay, good. Sorry, you were about to say?
For studying Islam, for me, it's more just studying to confirm what I already know
Okay.
versus like chemistry. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Fair enough. Anybody? Yeah.
Physical with like chemistry versus the metaphysical with a lot of stuff.
He's already taken on those terms. MashaAllah. Allahumma barak. All right. Yes. So knowledge benefits you in the akhirah. Okay. You about to say something?
Yeah, I would say study Islam is also beneficial in the spiritual sense, not just cultivating, the understanding of Islamic, whatever you're studying, but also making ibadah. There is ajr.
Exactly. Right. Very good. Very good. So let me just mention this particular hadith. It kind of highlights the difference, right? Because the Prophet said something specifically speaking about now knowledge. Okay. So there's a dua Zayd ibn Arqam mentions that the Prophet ﷺ makes. He says, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge that does not benefit. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yakhsha' wa min nafsin la tashba' wa min da'watin la yustajibu laha." All right? Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from a knowledge that does not benefit, from a heart that is not reverent, from a soul that is not content, from a supplication that is not answered. One of the interesting and fascinating things when you study certain hadith is to find connections between concepts. So I was mentioning the 7 promised paradise, or sorry, not 7, the 7 the 7 under the shade. There's a connection between them. I can't go into it. It'll make like a whole shut of the hadith would be too long. But even in this, there's a connection between these categories. So let me ask you, what kind of dua would not be answered? Because the Prophet ﷺ says, "I seek refuge in you from a dua that is not answered." What dua is not answered? Okay, what else? I'm thinking about something very specific. Yeah. One that's not sincere? Okay, yeah.
Does not have any intention. You're not really connected to your dua. You're just saying it. That's aqidu. You're not really connected to it.
Okay, all right.
A lot of supplication that we do without really meaning what you say.
Okay, all right. But something very specific I'm thinking about though, yes. Sorry? So a dua that you're making against somebody. Okay. But I don't know if I agree with that though. Because the dua of the parents are accepted, right? That could actually harm your children, right? So, yeah, and also the zalimeen, like you mentioned, right? So even that, like sometimes you want destruction on a certain people, right? So that would be accepted, yeah.
Asking for haram.
That's close. Asking for the haram. You're getting there. You're getting warmer.
Asking for something that's not good for you.
Asking for something that's not good for you. Okay, maybe. So here's what I'm thinking about. You remember that there was a hadith where this man was out in the desert. He loses his camel. Okay? And he loses his camel and he starts, calling out to Allah, Rabbi, Rabbi. And the Prophet ﷺ says, how will Allah answer his dua when his food is haram, his drink is haram, his wealth is haram? Right? So one of the things we know is that if your rizq, right, if you're, how you're making money and spending money, if that is haram, that is an impediment to an accepted dua. Okay? Now, why is that important in this context? Let me go back to the top. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge that does not benefit. What kind of knowledge is non-beneficial knowledge? Okay? So the scholars classically, they said, ilm la yanfa'. You can have two types of knowledge. One is knowledge of the dunya, the world, that has no benefit in the dunya or the akhirah. Okay, that's one. The second is knowledge of Islam. Wait a minute, aren't you telling us to study Islam? Like, what do you mean, knowledge of Islam? Let me go to the first category. In the example that is sometimes given in classical text about knowledge that does not benefit you in the dunya or the akhirah is like knowledge of genealogy. Like you have all these charts of genealogy, people spend some time to memorize it. It has a certain benefit, but generally, it's really not. So I was thinking, what would be a contemporary example? And so as I was thinking about this, I was like, what would be a good contemporary example? Ilm la yanfa', knowledge does not benefit you in the dunya, does not benefit you in the akhirah. You know what I came up with? Yes, exactly. Sports teams, right? And figures and stats and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like when my kid gets into this, I'm like, dude, what are you doing, man? Like are you planning to be like a newscaster or a sportscaster or something? Like it literally has no benefit in the dunya or the akhirah. Now I'm not saying it's haram or something like that, don't get me wrong. That's not what I want you to walk away with. I'm talking about ilm la yanfa', knowledge that is not beneficial. That's one category. But the second category, knowledge of Islam. Now why would I be saying that's knowledge that is not beneficial? Knowledge of Islam that is not implemented, acted upon. That becomes knowledge that is not beneficial. Okay? Now, if we say that is knowledge that is not beneficial, what is beneficial knowledge? It is the knowledge of Allah, of His names and attributes, of why He's worthy of worship. That is beneficial knowledge. Okay? Let's go to the next one. When a person has knowledge that, let's say, doesn't benefit, the next thing the Prophet ﷺ says that a heart that has no khushu'a. Okay? By the way, what is khushu'a? What do we mean by that? Connection? Right. Awareness, awe. Some people say fear, right? And I'll tell you why it's difficult to translate khushu'a. Because remember I was talking about, let's say you go to a big waterfall or a big tree or a big mountain. The concept of awe is that you feel small, and it's a type of fear, but not the type of fear where it's like, oh my God, someone's coming to kill me fear, right? That's a different fear. This is a fear where like, you feel like small, right? And so awe is a type of fear, and that's essentially what, in a sense, khushu' is, to the best of my explanation of explanatory ability. Yeah?
I thought about this for a long time, and
MashaAllah.
So, I drive my understanding from the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ خَاشِعَةً. And then every time He's given us a visual of khashi'ah that's cracking up.
Yep.
So when I think about that, I say that the state that a human being then can have that psychological feeling,
Yeah.
we call khushu', is the opening of the person. He opens up.
Right.
When do we open up? When our feeling full, like
Right.
psychological full,
Right.
not material full.
Right.
As soon as that state happens, psychological state happens,
Yep.
then the khushu' show up, as this state. And it's not necessarily crying or all these things that we see.
Sure.
But it's more that psychological.
No, that's good. The very same ayah, Ibn Rajab mentions that it means to be broken, when you feel broken before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that crack and the broken and so on and so forth. That's good. Jazakallah khair. So from a heart that is not reverent, doesn't have this awe, okay? So let's connect the first with the second. What is beneficial knowledge? Knowledge of Allah. The more you know of Allah, the more in awe of Him you are. Correct? Let's go to the next one. From a soul, from a nafs that is not content. In other words, you always want more. More and more and more and more. I want this car, I want the next car, I want the next car. Here's the thing. If you don't have knowledge of Allah, you don't have khushu' of Allah. Right? That khushu' is missing. If the khushu' is missing, then all you're worried about is your nafs. You just want more and more and more. Right? Because that's you have this hole now. And so now you need to fill it with something, so you go off and go shopping sprees and yada yada, and you run up your credit card bill and so on and so forth. So you're never content. If you are in that state and you constantly want to buy more and more, will you care whether it's halal or haram? What do you think?
Eventually not.
Eventually not. What is the dua that's not answered? The person that doesn't care. So you notice the connection between all of these, right? And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about studying Islam versus studying. That this, we understand it from how does this affect me? How do I become the knowledge? Right? As opposed to, these are just facts that we have, that are just kind of there, and we need to learn them for whatever reason. Okay? So, very quickly now, I'm going to move past some more. So what are some of the benefits? So number one, knowledge will dismantle shubuhat. When you're armed with knowledge, now if someone brings a shubha, you can completely, dismantle it. And we'll do one case study. Do I want to do women's inheritance, or do I want to do the age of Aisha? So I have two case studies. One is women's inheritance, one is the age of Aisha. Which one would you like us to go on? And that'll probably be the last thing we do. Really? You don't get the inheritance thing? I like the inheritance thing more, but okay. We'll do the age of Aisha. All right. We'll go with the age of consent. All right? So there's a couple of things here. Now, number one, there is, when we understand, so first of all, what is the issue exactly? Let's now outline it. Someone give it to me. What do people say about Aisha radiallahu anha?
So she was underage, and what they say, she was underage, and
Sure.
the Prophet, had
Married her.
relationship.
Right. Okay, so what is the exact age? Do you guys know? Like what's mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari? She was married at 6, and then the marriage was consummated at 9. Okay, that's the narration as far as I know.
First had the menses.
Yeah, perhaps. I would assume that's when the menses started, right? But the point is that what is the problem? What is being cast here? Why are people freaking out over this? Pedophilia, right? Child abuse. So the claim, there's a false accusation that Islam facilitates child abuse. That's where this is coming from, essentially. Right? It's not, okay, the moral kind of incongruence with one's, state. It's, wait a minute, this is something that will facilitate child abuse. One of the things I always say is that, look, it's almost like you take an ethnocentric bias and you superimpose it because you're interested in this accusation. Like imagine now, just for a second, that you have, this person who's existent in the 21st century. He's educated and, erudite, suit and tie, and he goes off to some random village in Africa. Okay? And in this village, there's a, 12-year-old girl that's marrying a 18-year-old boy. And this man walks in, let's say he's a white guy, right? I guess, just for effect. He walks in and he says, "Stop! This marriage must not happen." And these people look at him and they say, "Eat him." Right? Right? By the way, that's a Kamal Makki joke, not mine. You can go back to him, all right? So anyway, the point is that we take certain ethnocentric biases and we superimpose them because we assume, and I spoke about this much earlier about progressivism, that morals can progress over time. Our understanding of the appropriate age now means that that is how it should be trans-historically, in every culture and in every situation. It's a big issue. Okay? My favorite, related to this issue, is, my grandmother is still alive. MashaAllah. Allahumma barik. Right? And so, there's a reason why she's still alive, right? Obviously, Allah decreed that she's alive. But the reason is because she was married very, very, very young. I want to say maybe 10, maybe 11 at best, right? And by the way, when she was married, like they didn't have birth certificates and stuff like that. So even when I go to her and I'm like, tell me about when you were married, and she's like, I think I was like 10, 11, not, whatever. And my grandfather, who's passed away, Allah yarhamhu, he was much older, like maybe in the 30s, 40s, something like that. And I always thought that I would take this issue, and imagine if I go to her, right? And I told her, I said, Grandmom, Granddad should be ashamed of himself. Okay, so, and she's had 7 children, okay? Who knows how many grandchildren, very comfortable life, very happy. Imagine if I went to her and I said that. Granddad should be ashamed of himself. Right? Terrible. Imagine you could go on and imagine what else I could say, where she'd just look at me and, because they speak, my grandmother speaks Punjabi, so she'd look at me and she'd say, oh, tera damag te khaam nahi ho gaya, right? Like, have you lost your mind, right? Like, what's wrong with you? But the issue is that if we take this at face value, you'd have to invalidate 2 generations. There's a reason my son can meet not his grandmother, his great-grandmother, right? Which is phenomenal. And it's not like she's like, okay, there's some sort of mental abuse, physical abuse. I mean, she's stronger than, honestly, a lot of young people, to be really honest, like mentally and stuff like that, Yeah.
No, I saw a picture of my ex-mother-in-law. She was 12 years old when she got married.
Allahu Akbar.
And her husband was he had died in Pakistan before I came on the scene.
Right.
He was like 58.
Wow.
And you would have thought there was a grown, full woman
Right.
standing there.
Right.
They matured much earlier back then.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that there's a problem when we superimpose modern ethics to the past. One phenomenon that is well documented is what's known as delayed adolescence, right? This is more so in boys, by the way. So, you find your 45-year-old fellas still playing video games and stuff like that, with all deference to all you guys who are playing video games, right? But the point is, it's an actual phenomenon, right? Like, you'll find that, boys that are growing up, hitting like 17, 18, 19 years, are less mature than someone, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, same age group, but can take on a lot more responsibility. And that's just time, for whatever reason, because of the inundation of technology or whatever it might be. But those realities are never taken into consideration. We simply just say, why? Because what's at stake? Why are they saying that? They want to perpetuate the false accusation that Islam facilitates child abuse. So if that's the case, then the issue is not about the age, it's about harm. And we have to kind of reconfigure how we take the issue. Okay? Does Islam talk about harm? Yes, of course. Of course, it's one of the legal maxims. I've been mentioning a few. Al-yaqeen la yazulu bi-shak and so on. I mentioned some of them. These are like the 5. The first one up there is there's no harm and no causing of harm. La darar wa la dirar. Right? So there's no harm and there's no causing of harm. Right at the end. And the hadith that's based upon has shuruh, has many explanations. How do we understand that? Legal implications, so on and so forth. If the issue is harm, but the issue isn't harm. It's about undermining the Islamic paradigm. That's the backdrop. Because even when you study this issue historically, when did this issue come up? 1900s, 1906 to be exact. The first recorded document that mentioned, even that wasn't mentioned in the sense that, oh, this is a problem, it said this might be a problem, doesn't happen until 1906. Before that, there's no mention about it. In fact, one of the papers that I'm writing, it's about polemics against Islam and kind of a genealogy of those polemics. And so some things you see that are very consistent. So this whole concept of like Muslims being violent, that's, you go all the way back to like John of Damascus, right? So John of Damascus, one of the earliest polemicists against Islam. He spoke Arabic, he was part of the, I think, the Abbasid Empire, whatever it was. And so he knew, and so he had certain claims that he made about Islam. He said it comes from a false prophet, they are violent by nature. And interestingly enough, the third thing that he mentions is that they are sexually promiscuous. Okay? What's at stake here is that there's always been a consistent thread of kind of these two complaints or two polemics that they come up with. Number one is the violence thing, which exists till today. That's, the narrative that Israel is trying to follow right now as well. Oh, they're just violent by nature, it's part of their DNA, whatever it might be, whatever they say, right? Somehow, even when you convert to Islam, you also inherit that DNA. How that works, I don't know, right? But anyway, so that's one thread. The other thread is this thread of sexuality. In the beginning, this thread started with they're over-sexualized. Because in a Christian world, early Christianity looked at sex as inherently sinful. By the way, do we say that sex inherently is a sin? No, right? In fact, we say it can be even an act of worship, right? It can be ibadah if you do it with your spouse, or whatever. And so we don't inherently say that sexual relations are a sin. So they started off, for whatever reason, they had certain, I can't get into it now because I'll start talking about my paper and I don't want to do that, the journal that I have, but it has to do with like kind of how Platonism influenced early Christianity. There's a couple of ayat that are very interesting related to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا كَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهَا وَعَلَيْهِمْ, like we did not write this upon them. ابتدعوها, they're the ones that came up with it. Very interesting. But I'll save that for the paper. Anyway, point being is that this is a thread that goes across. It starts off from this perspective that they're over-sexualized. And so a lot of these discussions you have, for instance, you have letters that go back from, like, I think it was Pope Leo III and Umar ibn Abdulaziz. Letters that are going back. And Pope Leo III, he writes, because from his worldview, he cannot conceptualize like Jannah having sensual pleasures. Like he's like, this is why Islam is false. Khalas. This is why he wrote it off. But logically, is that not a reason, right? But again, it follows this entire line. Now, over time, because they went from over-regulation to over-celebration, right? Islam is the middle path. We celebrate sexuality and we regulate sexuality. It's heavily regulated, but heavily celebrated, right? The problem is, the Western world, it starts from being overly regulated to the point that you have, people that are giving, even Catholics, even till today, the highest ethic is one that says that you don't get married, right? Which has its own issues. But point being, early on, that was considered as perfect. So they went from over-regulation to casting off the yoke of religion and to over-celebration. Now everything goes, everything's open. So the complaint initially was, you're over-sexualized. Now, women need to come out of hijab, they need to do this, they need to do that. In other words, you're not sexualized enough. All right, man, pick a lane. Which one do you want? Yeah? Anyway, coming back to the issue. So, false accusations, Islam facilitates child abuse. Legal maxims run antagonist to that. So, no harm and no causing of harm. If you're interested in the other legal maxims, you can talk to Shaykh Yasser, inshallah. We'll take you through them, inshallah. All right. So, when we talk about like harm, there are basically two categories that are there, that not two, but rather three, and actually two, but the one is a subcategory. One is like mental, psychological harm, right? But psychological harm, or rather psychological and sociological harm, is dependent upon urf. And one of the other legal maxims that I mentioned was al-urf muhakkam, or al-ada muhakkam, right? Culture has legal precedence. And this is important because it shows you the greatness and the amazing nature of the Sharia itself. Okay? Because it takes custom and culture and social consideration and custom considerations, it takes that very seriously. So if someone says like, oh, would you get your sister married at 9? Well, that's not the point. The point is, in my current culture and custom, I wouldn't do that. But I don't have to apologize for that. And I don't have to apologize for the Sira for that either, right? Because that is the nature of the Sharia. It takes custom and culture into consideration. Conversely, if there's a custom and a culture where that is true, it doesn't penalize that custom and that culture, right? Which existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and for generations after that. You were mentioning, like even here in the States, there's actually a book called Child Brides of America. Very fascinating book. So that was extant in the United States until only very recently. Yeah.
I mean, there was young marriages, like all up until like the 1800s, 1850s, 1900s.
Tawan.
For Christians.
Of course.
Now it just changed. Now it's just this new issue.
And that's why I was saying progressivism. Like in the progressive worldview, your current moral is what trans-historically determines what is correct and moral and ethical. But if you wait a couple years, maybe that'll change, right? We can get into pediastry and, so that'll be okay then, because now people should have the right to have relations with young boys or whatever they're trying to push for and stuff like that, right? That's actually a movement, by the way. I don't know if you know. So, yeah. And so there's a movement that says, no, we should have the right to do that, right? These boys have rights, we have rights, it's all about love. Khalas, let's go, right?
Someone give a TEDx talk on it.
A TEDx talk on it, Allahu Akbar. Yeah.
Can we say that actually the latent age of marriage happened because the industrial revolution, because they needed people to work in manufacturing, they needed people to go to school so they can indoctrinate them. So they don't want them to be occupied with having a family or doing whatever.
So there's a number of theories that have come up as to why they decided on certain ages like 18 and whatever 21 or whatever it might be. One of them is a theory is economic factors. So it may be possible, and they talk about the Industrial Revolution. So that's a possibility. Nevertheless, the reality is that maybe it's part of the culture and the climate here. So it doesn't mean you have to now go off and marry 9-year-olds or something like that. But it just means that your custom or your culture is taken into consideration. Let me give you kind of a practical example of how the Sharia uses this, because I think it's just right now it's just very theoretical. Okay, let's pretend now that there's a case a divorce case in Saudi Arabia. Okay, let's say this happened 10 years ago. Let's say, okay. Now the judge, the qadi, has to decide, okay, the assets, how are they going to be distributed? All right, so in Saudi, and I'm picking on Saudi, if you're from Saudi, there's nothing against you or anything like that. So the qadi is now going to decide, okay, kitchen supply is going to go to who? Man or the woman? The woman, okay? The vehicle, the car, is going to go to the man or the woman? The man. 10 years ago, it was not now. I'm not talking about now. 10 years ago, right? Go to the man. Okay. Weapons, man or the woman? Man. Here's the thing. What is the criteria that the qadi is using? Urf, the culture, right? According to Saudi culture, weapons go to the man. Let's take that same case and move it to Texas. All right? Now we love our guns, right? Okay? So my wife, she teaches in public school, just FYI. All of her coworkers, female, their favorite thing to do on the weekend is to go shooting. So if you have the same case, divorce case, it would be incorrect for the qadi to say that the guns would go to the man. That would be incorrect. He would have to actually say, hold on, we have to adjudicate this in a way that's different. Maybe we'll split the guns or whatever it might be. Or maybe the guy doesn't even like shooting, right? The guns would go to the woman. Culture has legal weight. Al-urf muhakkam. Right? What happens is, when you have kind of this false understanding that, okay, well, we're not going to take culture into consideration, you actually make moral faux pas. You misjudge things. Okay? And you make assumptions that are totally incorrect. So, second type of harm is bodily harm. Okay? Within that, things that are considered physical well-being, mental and psychological well-being, social acceptance, all those things are taken into consideration when we're trying to define harm. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these things. When you look at Aisha radiallahu anha, mental and psychological well-being, could we say that she had serious mental problems? A'udhu billah. No! She's one of the most prolific, amazing scholars and hadith narrators of this ummah. But if someone is part of like some, pedophilic, relationship, and they're being abused and they're being harmed, this is not the result of that. Right? Yeah.
Actually, some scholars have argued, like Muslim scholars, that the age of consent in the United States should actually be raised.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they should. Yeah.
Because they're not even like, if you compare, for example, a 14-year-old
Right.
in a village in Pakistan,
Yeah.
versus a 21-year-old in California
Who's
Los
playing video
Angeles,
games.
it's not even like close.
No, it's true.
One could handle a family and one couldn't. So
Right, yeah,
Islam is based
exactly.
on whether you're mentally.
Sahih. It's true. I'm sure. Why not? Yeah.
California, Mississippi, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Washington State.
Yeah.
California being one of them, do not have a statutory minimum on marriage.
Really?
Zero. That's five, as of last year, this is still.
Wow.
One of these things that people don't take into consideration. And in a lot of places,
Seeking knowledge.
south,
Arm yourself with knowledge. There you go. Highlights my point.
in Oklahoma, 14-year-olds and 25-year-olds get married.
Wow.
And it's a legal marriage.
Right.
In California, there is no statutory minimum age.
Wow.
5
SubhanAllah.
states in the United States don't have a statutory minimum age.
SubhanAllah. Okay, so coming back to this, we talk about mental and physical psychological well-being. We said Aisha is one of the most prolific narrators of hadith, 2210 to 2210 hadith. A quarter, so Al-Aini says, he says a quarter of legalistic judicial rulings present in the Sharia is by way of Aisha radiallahu anha. A quarter, 1/4 of the legal rulings. And by the way, most of the legal rulings related to women and women's issues come from where? Aisha radiallahu anha, right? So Aisha was also outspoken in her brazenness in voicing her opinions. This is very well known, right? That she was never shy. You think Aisha, you don't think of someone that's just like a quiet, just keeping. No, just very like confident, very all of those things that you would think about. Okay, so based on her own words, her marriage was based on love and dignity and respect and affection, right? So that was under the physical and psychological well-being. Mental and psychological well-being. Physical well-being, there's no harming nor superficial harm, we just mentioned that. Social customs and considerations, no one accused the Prophet ﷺ of wrongdoing or going against social custom until 1906, right? Even St. John of Damascus, who starts the first polemic, that's not one of the issues. Interestingly enough. So you'd have to ask why. His own enemies during his lifetime, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did not bring this up as a point. Because it was widely accepted. It's very normal. Okay. The other thing is that it's anachronistic. By the way, do you guys know what an anachronism is? No? So an anachronism is something that's misplaced in time. So if you said the Romans would refer to their watches, what's the problem with saying that? Yeah, watches didn't exist, so that would be an anachronistic statement. Okay? So this becomes anachronistic because we already mentioned social customs change. Right? So, as Brother Khalid mentioned, many societies, including the West, allowed marriage to younger women. Social conditions are different. Okay? Professor Margaret Wade Labrage mentions, she says, it must be remembered that many medieval widows were not old. Important heiresses were often married with the ages of 5 and 10. Might find themselves widowed while still in their teens. Can you imagine? You get to be 13, widow. In fact, there's a case that Imam Shafi'i adjudicates of a 25-year-old grandmother. Right? Very normal. Okay? In medieval and early modern European societies, the age of marriage remained low, with documented cases of brides as young as 7 years old, although marriages were typically not consummated until the girl reached puberty. At the start of the 19th century in England, it was legal to have sex with a 10-year-old girl. All right? And at the end of the day, and what I was mentioning about my own grandmother, we are here because of such social practices. if you jettison those practices, you say, no, they should not, then perhaps it's a self-defeating objection. Many of us wouldn't be here, right? In those relationships.
There's a miscommunication on the scheduling, so if we could wrap up in like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. No worries, inshallah. Okay. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here, inshallah. Okay. So I'm going to kind of skip this. You can get this, I think. So I just mentioned this thing. Now you might be like, okay, what is going on with this guy? Why does he have Young Justice and the Justice League up there? You know, I was looking at this and I realized that there's this one kind of episode where they're trying to discuss, should Superboy and whoever this girl is, I don't know what her name is, but anyways, should they be allowed to enter the Justice League? Said, okay, well, her in Martian years, she's 55 years old. He was created in a test tube. He's 3 years old, right? So if we base it on age, how can we let them into the Justice League? All right? Now, the issue, why I'm kind of mentioning this is that here, there's no problem in understanding that there's different social conditions. I don't remember if they're actually allowed to come to the Justice League or not, but that's irrelevant, right? It highlights the point that there are different social conditions that exist in different times and different places. That's all my whole purpose of this slide, and to catch your attention as well, but like, what's going on up there? So, all right? Okay. So at the end, I will conclude with this. The defining principle within Sharia is that any harm is to be warded off as long as it can be avoided, as the safeguarding of man and preventing harm from befalling upon him in any way whatsoever is a firm, established principle in Islam. All of the legalistic, juristic rulings are built upon achieving the benefits of the slaves of Allah, and every right is stipulated with avoiding any harm. So, I need to stop right here, because we need to conclude. We have Asr, we have another program coming up. Like I mentioned, as the last kind of concluding point here, this entire course, whatever you missed, you can find it online, right? And there's a lot more to go, right? Even within this section, there's a second case study and so on and so forth, and just a lot more that you can benefit from, bi'idhnillah. So please go to the site, log on, take the course, and then when you take it, make sure you make dua for me, right? Inshallah. So with that said, it was a great, I'm very happy that I came. I visited all of you. If I said something that was out of place or I offended you in some way, please forgive me for that. It was not my intention. May Allah bless all of you, bless your community, grant you the best of this dunya and the best of the akhirah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your families. And may He allow us all to meet al-Hawd, the pond at which once you drink from the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, you will never be thirsty again. May Allah allow us all to meet there and enter Jannat al-Firdaus. And with that said, Jazakumullah khair, Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.